What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So the voice is fighting back, which actually lines up perfectly for Nintendo to make their move, because we're starting to see all kinds of stuff happen, of course, with another image leaking online and people showing up at CES, apparently with the Switch 2, and then announcing accessories for the system before Nintendo's even shown it. So we'll go over all of that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Nvidia now revealing their 50 series video cards with some surprising prices. And then we now have on record the most expensive video game that's been at least disclosed at this point, with a budget that, well, is just outright eye-popping. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton, especially for the voice. Hit the like button to try to get the voice to come back. And if you're new to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members of the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with WWE 2K25. As it appears, it is set for its grand reveal later on this month, January 28th. But after it was technically teased during Raw on Netflix the other night, we had store pages go live, and wouldn't you know it, the PS4 and the Xbox One are indeed getting a version, which means they continue to roll along the VCR and the original base PS4 in 2025, which is something that we have talked about quite extensively. How far will the last generation platforms go? Well, definitely through this year. And typically the sports games like wrestling or Madden or NBA would be the last games to kind of let that older generation go. But they're more than willing to pull them along into 2025. And since we already have some games, third-party games, with 2026 PlayStation 4 releases, this could end up being the longest generation maybe we've ever seen, especially since into 2026. That would be 13 years getting at least somewhat serious support from third parties. Also, we did get new accessory variations that were announced by Sony. This is over on PlayStation Blog. This is the Midnight Black collection. We have a PlayStation Portal, a DualSense Edge, a Pulse Explorer, and Pulse Elite. And you know what? I do like the look of that PlayStation Portal, although I already have one, and that's kind of that's the weird situation. While I will compare it to a controller with a screen, I'm also not willing to say, oh yeah, I want multiple PlayStation Portals in the same household. So I guess in this case, if you don't have one and maybe you're holding out for a Midnight Black edition, there you go. Although, if you didn't have one ahead of when they did the PlayStation anniversary, the 30th anniversary stuff, I mean, I don't know why you didn't get that one, because that looked awesome. But still, that, or maybe even the DualSense Edge. I do like the matte black accessories, at least those ones I tend to pick up. So maybe a DualSense Edge down the road. If mine just kind of gets worn into the point where it starts having issues, that might be the replacement. Oh, and it looks like we may have the developer for Oblivion Remake, as that has been kicked around in the rumor mill for quite some time. And we're actually expecting an announcement for it here pretty soon. But we can see this is posted up. This is over on Twitter X from Tim, as they notice Virtuous seems to have an unannounced Unreal Engine 5, PS5, Xbox Series X, and PC Remake listed, which, I mean, would it shock anyone if Unreal or Oblivion Remake was announced and there was a PS5 logo there? No, probably not. Some were wondering if this is technically, what was that, Metal Gear Solid Delta? But I don't know. This kind of looks like this, to me, could be that Oblivion Remake, and we should actually see that announced here pretty soon, as we're expecting an Xbox Developer Direct at some point in January, and we're more than a week in now, so probably in the second half, we'll have Microsoft announce that they are doing a Direct, and that Oblivion Remake is there, with apparently Virtuous doing it, and they've been quite busy with some of these high-profile remakes, again, Metal Gear, and now we're hearing more and more about Oblivion, so very interested to see how they turn in with both of those this year. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with the Switch 2, which has had, again, trickle feed of information, news, images just getting out there. And not only was CES underway, but also we just have images from, for example, we can see this is Laura Kate Dale, who was well known on the build-up for the original Switch, or I guess the Switch we have now, where they were putting out information about it, rumors and stuff. And I will say some was right, some wasn't. So in this case, though, they're just sharing the back of the dock, an image, so we can kind of go off of it on our own. But we can see the biggest part here is some of it is legible, specifically input and output in terms of power. And that is 20 volts, 3 amps for input, and the output coming in at 15 volts, 2.8 amperage. And typically you can get wattage, you just multiply voltage, amperage. So in this case, they're thinking, okay, that's a 60-watt charger to use with the dock. Now, I don't think it's shocking for anyone to think that, oh, the Switch 2 is going to pull more power than the current Switch. Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all sort of expecting, right? I mean, we're looking at this as 8 nanometer Samsung using Ampere and DLSS. Yeah, that's going to be a bit more power hungry than the X1 from 2015 and some of the features there versus the one that we're expecting on the Switch 2. The big thing here to me is you won't be able to use your charger that you have now for the current Switch with the Switch 2 in terms of the dock. You can still, I'm sure, charge your Switch 2 with it, much like you can with most power bricks that have USB-C at least, but in this case, it will be somewhat limited, and you would expect there to be some sort of charge brick that would come with it anyway. I assume just one that will be branded with Nintendo's logo, similar to one we have now, just more wattage coming out, in that case, 60 watts. Now, the other thing happening here actually has to do with CES. That is currently ongoing. We just had day one where LG showed off a really cool, transparent OLED display. It like rises up out of the countertop. I was like, that's cool. And they said it's $60,000. And well, it was fun while it lasted. But we also had some accessories that were being announced all over the place for the Switch 2. In fact, you can see this image, and this is over on VGC right now that has both of these, as it looks like a Switch 2 is there. Well, technically it's a mock-up. So do you know how we're seeing all these 3D printed systems going around online for comparisons in terms of size? Well, it seems like that's what Genki has here. And they were making a big deal of this. Oh, we're going to answer questions at CES if you come by our booth. And that seems to be what they're doing. They're just talking to attendees about this system. They also showed off their, like these Joy-Con mock-ups here that have different grips and stuff on it. And apparently, which there should be a write-up, I think it's supposed to be today. Apparently they have a Switch 2, like an actual system, which, okay, I mean, we'll see about that. They were also mentioning like April as the release that they're expecting for the system. So apparently there'll be a write-up here at some point with a publication. They mentioned today, but it could be anytime this week that we'll dive more into that. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But in this case, for Genki, it's a good way to get interest and traffic to your booth. Just saying, hey, we have a Switch 2 replica. You can come by and hold it and do comparisons yourself, and then we'll tell you about our product line, which, again, that seems to be the strategy for many of these different companies at CES. You get a bit of a spotlight when you start talking about the unannounced system from Nintendo that's going to be their next generation offering, even if you're just talking about like a silicone skin or just a casing for it or a screen protector. Everyone's really curious about it. There's a lot of hype, obviously, around this anticipated announcement that could be happening at any time. In fact, if I was Nintendo, I would announce today that there's a trailer tomorrow. Why? Because that's two ways they can spite me. One, they can release it and they can mention it an hour after this news wave goes up. And two, now they see where I am with my voice. This would be the time to strike, to drop the Switch 2 reveal. And if it happens, well, you're welcome. Next up, let's talk about Nvidia and their 50 series cards that they did announce on stage at CES, along with all kinds of other stuff, which got a bit out there for people who are tuning in for the gaming side of things, which we'll just kind of go over the different cards here. So we can start from the top with the big card, that being the RTX 5090. It is indeed retailing for $2,000 or $1,999, and that was kind of expected. That was a price that I was thinking they were going to have up there on the big screen when they made the announcement, although it does look a bit smaller than expected. I thought it'd be like a 3 or 4 slot card. It's actually a 2 slot card, and they showed off the board with the massive chip there. It's pretty small. So, I mean, in that case, it's actually kind of impressive with the size of it. Now, here's where things do get surprising with the pricing. The 5080 is coming in at $999. So it's actually a little cheaper from what I remember than the 4080, or about the same price. The 5070 Ti is $50 cheaper than the 4070 Ti, this being $749, and the 5070 is $549, $50 cheaper than the 4070. And then they mentioned that the 5070 and the 5070 is actually 4090 performance, and that shocked everyone. So the biggest thing here, and people need to realize this, is DLSS 4.0 is a big selling point, and when you look at the raw performance, honestly, on the charts that even Nvidia themselves shared, it was like 20% difference. And when you take that into account as heavily curated, favorable benchmarks, I have a feeling when independent reviewers get these cards and start matching them up to the previous generation, it won't even be that impressive. I think it'll be like a 15, maybe 20% increase just in the best case scenario. And I think a lot of the money, the R&D and stuff, is just going into more the upscaling solutions to get incredible performance jumps, which I think is how they are basically comparing the 5070 to the 4090, because DLSS 4, their different frame generation techniques and stuff are sort of handling the heavy lifting and getting hundreds of frames per second versus the previous generation. That said, I don't think the average gamer is going to care that much about it being DLSS or frame generation to get it there, just that it gets there, and actually at a price point that is not as bad as I would expect from Nvidia. $549, and it's 5090 experience. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of people take interest, and in fact, they have. So I think that actually might be the most popular card, although it does have 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and while I don't think that's going to be a problem again for most, it could become a problem in the future here in the next year or two, as we are seeing just VRAM in general becoming more and more of a bottleneck for current video cards. In that case, you'll want to go up to either the 4070 Ti or the 5070 Ti or the 5080 and get 16 gigabytes of GDDR7 memory, or I guess technically go all the way up to the 5090 for really no reason for most of the consumer base and get 32 gigabytes of GDDR7. Either way, you're looking for a launch with these cards on January 30th, so you might want to take a look around, see what place they're going to be doing pre-orders, and get that set up if indeed you are looking to upgrade to the latest cards from Nvidia. Next up, let's talk about Lenovo and their Legion Go S that they did show off and announce at CES, and it's kind of a mixed bag because they have all these different SKUs. They even tease the Z2 Extreme in their Lenovo Legion 2, but they really wanted to focus to be on the fact that they are partnering with Valve and they will have their own SteamOS enabled handheld. And again, the offering here is it's kind of all over the place, but let's actually start from the top here. So with Lenovo Legion Go S, they have two versions. There's a SteamOS and a Windows version of this handheld. The Windows version is releasing in January, so this month, coming out of the price of $730. It's a Z2 Go, the newer chipset from AMD. 32 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage. However, I think many people are going to be more curious about the SteamOS version that is releasing in May at the price of $500. So again, better pricing there, I think. The Z2 Go also is in that system along with 16 gigabytes of memory, so half of the RAM that we have in the Windows version from this month, and then 512 gigabytes of storage. On top of that, there will also be a Windows version with those same specifications at $600. So it does make me think that maybe Valve is subsidizing the Legion Go S in some way with that SteamOS enabled, or at least the OS that comes pre-installed out of the box, because it would benefit them to have that system have SteamOS because it immediately would direct you to Steam. So they would actually make more money from you in the long run if you have a SteamOS Legion Go version rather than Windows. Now, the screen size, 8-inch resolution coming in at 1920 by 1200 is a 120 hertz variable refresh rate screen. So it will look good in motion, of course, if you can get higher frame rates, but that is still remains to be seen with the Z2 Go, since I did see some places like a Dave2D, for example, had one, but it was like an early production model, so still trying to figure out things with drivers and performance, but it does appear to be performing better than the Steam Deck, which has that custom chipset, and it looks like Lenovo is targeting 2 to 2.5 hours of battery life while playing demanding games. Now, I mentioned the question around updates and performance. It does appear that outside of specific hardware updates for the Steam Deck's hardware configuration, the SteamOS enabled Legion Go S will be getting the same updates. So any kind of things for updates for Proton or game specific updates will also go to this Legion Go S. So in that case, that's actually pretty interesting just to see how this one sells versus Windows. And I mean, $100 cheaper, same specifications, but you could also look at that and say it's less robust because Windows just has so much to offer outside of just playing games technically, or even just games that are set up for SteamOS. You have Windows, you can do all kinds of emulation, other things a bit easier out of the box. SteamOS takes a bit more work to get there, but you can still get there. Still though, I am curious about this one. I think $500 it's not like the lowest I'd like to see. I'd love to see it at $400, really be aggressive with the price, but even $500 for Lenovo, who's looking to actually make money on the system when they release it, it's not too bad. And that's one of the reasons I think Valve maybe got a bit involved in the back end when it comes to subsidizing this thing to get SteamOS out there to more and more people. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the biggest budget for a video game on record so far. And we've seen some budgets get thrown around, for example, in the court filings that were happening with the FTC and Microsoft. Poor redactions showed us that Sony had spent more than $200 million on a handful of titles like Horizon and The Last of Us Part 2. Well, now it looks like some court filings are actually giving us an indication as to how much Call of Duty costs to make. And get ready for this one. This was actually posted up over on GameFile with Steven Totillo, where he says, in a court filing reviewed by GameFile that has not been previously reported, Patrick Kelly, Activision's current head of creative on the Call of Duty franchise, said that 3 Call of Duty games released between 2015 and 2020 cost between $450 to $700 million to make. Now, they did list 3 different Call of Duty games. I wanted to go with the most expensive here, but I will leave a link down below to the article and the report in question that goes over the other 2 games, but Black Ops Cold War. Treyarch and Raven Software took years to create the game with a team of hundreds of creatives. They ultimately spent over $700 million in development costs over the game's life cycle, with 30 million copies sold to date. That's right, $700 million. That is absolutely ridiculous. But I will say that $1 billion plus in terms of budget for Grand Theft Auto 6 doesn't sound so far-fetched now after hearing about a Call of Duty game from 2020 costing $700 million. Now, they said they sold 30 million copies, so you can sort of justify that sort of a budget, although it is down from some of the other Call of Duty games that were listed here in this court filing. Those were over 40 million, but still, they have Warzone and microtransactions, other ways to make money. But a lot of that was probably front-loaded since it's a massive push during that first holiday, since it's yearly. So I'm sure they made more than the budget easily, but because of that, they're able to justify it. But it also makes you wonder, what if they completely miss one time? They could be in the hole for hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's, once again, why it's very, very risky for these big AAA publishers and developers to try things that are a bit too different, a bit too weird, because it costs so much money to make games. And $700 million for Call of Duty, I mean, you can cut that in half and then cut it in half again, and that budget alone could completely wipe out most studios out there now. So yeah, Call of Duty can justify it. $1 billion for Grand Theft Auto 6, they could probably justify that too. But if these costs continue to get up there, I mean, it's going to be getting harder and harder to not only take chances, but just to be able to break even for a lot of these big games. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. That's Game of the Year Madness Day 15, Dragon's Dogma 2 versus Kunitsugami Path of the Goddess. And Dragon's Dogma 2 ran over at 72% to 28%. Not too surprising, although there were a lot of people in the comments who were like, hey, Kunitsugami was actually a really cool creative game from Capcom. And those are the things I like to see, because we just talked about the massive budget from Call of Duty where companies will play it safe. I like these smaller projects from companies like Capcom, who does seem to be looking around a bit more to try different things and introduce even new IPs or revive older ones. So it is still cool to see Kunitsugami at least be able to pull off 28% versus a game that many people had as like one of the best titles of 2024 in Dragon's Dogma 2. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Gremlin, who says they are already talking next generation. Like, what happened this generation? This generation still feels like it just started. This was like one of the most upvoted comments, and it's so funny to think that we still have that mindset that the generation just started when we're now more than 4 years. I mean, the PS5 and the Xbox Series came out in November of 2020. We're more than 4 years into this generation. And there are good games that have come out this generation, but I think people are still looking for that generation-defining release in a sea of cross-gen title. I mean, we have some games that came out only for this generation, third-party and first-party, but it hasn't been anything where it's like, wow, okay, that defines the PS5, or like, whoa, that defines the Xbox Series, because for a while there, we were still seeing PS4 and Xbox One show up and the end card from these first-party studios and these first-party companies with these platform holders. So I'm thinking the second half, now Sony's starting to get moving a bit, Microsoft especially getting moving a bit more into 2025, maybe we'll start to finally define this generation and people will feel like it's actually started in 2025, just more than 4 years later. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. We made it through despite the voice. Hey, if we can help it, we don't miss here for Newswave on weekdays. And of course, if you didn't like the video, hit the dislike, leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe you wanted to see what some of my thoughts were around how Nintendo can surprise us once again with the Switch 2, this time though with some games and software, I'll leave that down below. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.